What's in a name? Well, turns out Americans and Germans have very different ideas of what's in a name and what you shouldn't be allowed to be named. Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. I am Donnie, and along with my wife Aubrey, we are two Americans currently living in Germany with our family, sharing all of our experiences living and traveling throughout Europe. But wait, am I really Donnie? Perhaps some of you already have this figured out, but for years I've been introducing myself as Donnie on this channel, but I think it's about time that I finally revealed to you guys that I'm not who you think I am. I'm Donald. Okay, maybe for some of you guys that was obvious, as you knew that Donnie was a nickname for someone named Donald based on other famous Donnie/Donalds you all know and love.
Hello everyone.
From nicknames like what I have to German authorities not approving a name for our first son and begrudgingly allowing us to name our second son what we wanted, to Germans not believing Aubrey actually has the middle name that she has, we have learned that when it comes to names, Germans and Americans have very different cultural norms. Well, that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today in my video. What's in a name? Well, apparently a very complicated game. Did you know that President Bill Clinton isn't actually named Bill? Or that Tina Fey wasn't named Tina? In the US, everybody just knows that nearly everybody with the name Bill is actually named William. I will admit most Americans would be hard pressed to know what Tina Fey's real name is, but when you learn it's Elizabeth, we all would get it. Wait, actually, I don't. Usually Elizabeth go by Liz, Lizzie, or Beth. Oh, her middle name is Stamatina? In the US, this is unbelievably common. Parents name their kids something, but they don't actually use those names. Or even parents will name their children something without ever having the intention of actually calling their children by the name they are giving them. When you are in school on the first day of school, it is very common for the teacher to call roll of the students, call out their legal name, but then ask them, do you go by this name or something else?
In Deutschland, this is totally inefficient and we will not allow it.
Okay, don't get me wrong, wir haben this, aber not like the Americans do. I was recently talking with some German friends who were talking about them noticing this phenomenon of Americans always going by nicknames and they didn't understand it. They had in my view, and I mean this with endearment, a very German perspective of this is my name, why would somebody call me something different? In the group, there was only one German friend who mentioned that sometimes her parents have a shortened name for her, but outside of that intimate relationship, she doesn't want somebody calling her anything else besides her legal name. And this struck me as really interesting. For her and these other Germans, a nickname or shortened name was for informal use. For me, a nickname is my name. Again, it's not that nicknames aren't a thing in Germany, it is. Andreas are often called Andi, or Christian are called Chris, and even the world famous brand Adidas, or Adidas for our Americans, is made up of the nickname of the founder Adolf Dassler, Adi. But between Germany and the US, there are definitely different layers of social formality as highlighted in my conversation with my German friends. In the US, we are a first name culture these days. It doesn't matter whether at home with friends or in professional settings, you often just introduce yourself with and use exclusively first names, and this is often what you're called, not your legal first name. There are some exceptions, of course, where more formal titles are used. But in Germany, however, there are significantly more social rules when it comes to when you use first names or not with someone. For example, it is still very common in business interactions to call someone Herr oder Frau and then their last names. Or for example, I have German neighbors who have never invited me to call them by their first names, and still to this day, I refer to them as Herr and Frau so-and-so. Something that just doesn't really happen in the US anymore. But what I've recently discovered is that there is an additional layer to formality rules in Germany that I believe often gets overlooked, and it pertains to nicknames. It seems you have last name basis, first name basis, and then you have nickname basis. In Germany, it is almost entirely unheard of that a head of state like Bill Clinton wouldn't go by his legal name of William. Here, that's just not really considered professional. One quasi-exception that technically isn't an exception might be Willy Brandt. Willy being a German shortened name for Wilhelm, although more often spelled with an I at the end. But Willy Brandt wasn't using a nickname, rather he was using a pseudonym. So what is a common nickname in Germany became his legal name, so he was following what I've seemed to have observed as German social norms by using his legal name, I guess. So again, Germans, let me know in the comments, is this also what you've kind of observed with your name or any nicknames that you have, or do you observe different social norms? However, there is one category of nicknames or shortened names that I have definitely observed even more starkly, and that is the acceptance in the US of just letters as names, unlike in Germany where I have yet to find anybody with just letters as names. Wait, okay, of course names are letters, well, unless you are children of Elon Musk. What I mean is just singular letters as names. Names like KJ, AJ, or RC. Typically, these names are the first letters of the first name, and then the J would represent junior, or the first letter of the first and middle name. Interestingly, President Harry S. Truman had a middle name that looks like an abbreviation, but that's actually it. His middle name was literally just the letter S. In Germany, that's not a name. I once tried to introduce a family member to some older German neighbors, and this particular family member has two singular letters that are used as his nickname, but it's what 100% of people call him and he always goes by. But the blank look I got back from my German neighbors as I tried to explain to them that this was his name, but they just didn't comprehend it, was one of the more uncomfortable social interactions I've had with Germans as I tried to explain it in every way possible, but they just never did get it. Which brings me to my next point about something I just mentioned and casually brushed over, and then the J would represent junior. But it's also an important note to make because it actually caused an issue that we had in which the German government did not allow us to name our son what we wanted. For myself, the end of my name has the suffix I for the third, and my son is the fourth. Well, at least not in Germany, officially. In Germany, this just isn't really done. At least anymore, generally. Okay, for sure not nearly at the rate that it is done in the US.
Rory, me. That's me.
Rory.
Well, Lorelai, technically.
Lorelai. I like that.
It's my mother's name, too. She named me after herself. She was lying in the hospital thinking about how men name boys after themselves all the time, you know? So why couldn't women?
In fact, it's so uncommon here that I've had at least 2 Germans look at my name before and ask, what's with all of these I's at the end of your name? As if they had never seen Roman numerals before. So culturally, this isn't unheard of in Germany. If we look at German history, for example, Wilhelm II, Friedrich III, and even what my son would have been, the 4th Frederick William. But of course, these were royals, and well, we aren't exactly royal, but I've even found evidence for this in Germany for non-royals as a custom. People like Friedrich Ebert, the first president of Germany, who named his son Friedrich Ebert II, who named his son Friedrich Ebert III. Or one I was recently surprised to learn about when Friedrich Merz gifted a birth certificate that contained the name Johannes Trump II. Donald Trump's grandfather, who was from Karlstadt. Therefore, it surprised me when our son was born that I told the Standesamt he was Donald IV, and they wouldn't allow it. I mean, officially. Interestingly, on every single one of my German identification documents, they always include my suffix, just like I would expect based on what I'm used to in the US. However, when I registered my son, I received one line that I hear all too often from German bureaucracy: it is not possible. In the US, the suffix is a part of your official name, and therefore every form or document you fill out will have a drop-down box for adding them, or you just simply type in the Roman numerals. The Standesamt in Germany told me that here it is not possible to add a suffix as there is no drop-down menu, and if they were to type it in to add it, then the last name would not match that of the father or mother and therefore would not be accepted. Long story short, my son in Germany is just Donald, officially. However, in the US, on all of his American documents where the naming culture is different, he is Donald IV. I do often get questions about this, in particular in Germany. I get questions like, doesn't this cause a lot of confusion between the generations with the same name? Or doesn't this cause psychological issues? Or some non-really questions, just statements of judgment about how narcissistic this is.
Uhtred, son of Uhtred.
Is the son of another Uhtred and another.
So for the last one, I guess if you're into judging different cultures because they don't match your norm, there's nothing I can do about that. But for the first question about confusion, meh, I guess. Only once in my life was I confused for my dad, once at a mechanic where in the system they expected a different car than what I brought in because of what was associated with either of our accounts. Otherwise, the odd few times that all generations are in the same room, the extent of the confusion is, "Hey Donnie," we all answer, "What?" And the person says, Granddad Donnie. So it's not really inconvenient. In terms of psychological damage caused, I would self-diagnose myself as well-adjusted to society, but what does the data show? On one hand, in the 1940s, one study found that juniors made up 76% of the permanent elected officers of the Harvard class of 1945 compared to 21% in the entire class and 3% in the entire population of the time. So pretty well-adjusted people. On the other hand, a 1971 study found there were 3 times as many juniors in psychiatric treatment as in the general population. But the study also showed mental health problems didn't seem to affect as many thirds, fourths, and fifths. So evidence suggests it might be the word junior itself that can do some damage. So my son and I are in the all clear. It's my father we need to worry about. Sorry, Dad. German names are boring, predictable, and overused. Well, talk about a judgmental statement. But that's compared to the US, where names seem to be getting more and more, how can I put this nicely, creative? Maybe that's putting it too nicely. I once was talking with a German friend who was saying how strange he found it that Americans use words as names sometimes and not actual names. He was mentioning names like faith, hope, and love. Names that honestly sound completely normal to me were confusing to him. Now, sure, there are some words that are used as names that even make an American turn their head a little, but for sure the US has a lot more flexibility when it comes to names and acceptance of those names. But much to an American surprise, sometimes the lack of creativity in Germany isn't actually a lack of creativity for German parents, but rather a lack of flexibility in German rules for names. As I just mentioned, we weren't exactly allowed to officially name our first son what we wanted to because he was born here, but that wasn't because the name was rejected. I mean, he has the name we wanted, just officially not the Roman numerals. However, we were very nervous about our second son's name not being allowed because Germany does have certain rules you must generally follow when naming a child. And the name we had in mind didn't technically follow those rules. In fact, these rules are also what actually at times has caused issues with Aubrey's name because it doesn't follow German norms either. Now, when I say Germany has certain rules, the law doesn't actually really specify which names are allowed or not. There is no grand list of names they follow. They are more like guidelines than actual rules.
The code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
But the German government does get final say on whether your name choice is approved or not, based on, well, the interpretation of your local authority of these very loose
guidelines.
Some of these guidelines are that they can't endanger the child's welfare, meaning something they could be bullied for having, as one example. The name must be recognizable as a name. The name can't be a place name or a surname, and you can't give more than 5 first names. All of these guidelines aren't hard and fast rules, and you will find exceptions to these all the time. In 2008, the Federal Constitutional Court ruled that first names in Germany don't have to reflect the gender of a child, but they can't be given a clearly opposite gender name. For example, there can't be any boys named Sue.
My name is Sue. How do you do?
However, the one interesting exception to this is that in particularly strong Catholic regions in Germany, men can have the name Maria, as in the clearly female mother of Jesus. And this is the issue that Aubrey has had with her name in Germany. No, not Aubrey or Maria. It's her middle name that causes issue. Aubrey's middle name is one that in the US is kind of a gender neutral, maybe can lean a little more to the masculine side at times, but in Germany, definitely is a male name, and that's Christian. We've had this happen multiple times, but a few days after arriving in Germany, we were at the health insurance office registering when the clerk looked at Aubrey's full name, looked at her, and questioned if it was really her name. Aubrey responded, yes, and the clerk responded, but this is a boy's name. For us not knowing German naming norms, we honestly were mildly offended. Who just makes a statement like that? And what were they expecting us to say back? So what was the naming issue with our second son? Well, there's an interesting, very subtle difference between German and American names, and when you look at German and American names, you wouldn't really notice the difference, but it's this. In Germany, you don't technically have a middle name. You have first names and then you have a surname. In the US, you have a first name, and most of the time, but not always, a middle name, and then of course a last name. That's not that big of a difference, but as the guidelines in Germany state, a first name can't be a surname. Well, for the protection of our child, I'm not going to say exactly what his name is, but we wanted a German middle name, and the one we liked happened to be a German surname. To be honest, the Standesamt didn't raise any questions about it at all, and in fact, when I went and picked up his birth certificate, they told me it was a beautiful name. But when we applied for German citizenship, my lovely naturalization officer raised questions. What is this name? His name, I responded. Yeah, but why is this his first name? That's not a name. Well, it is a name. It's just more common as a last name. Genau, not a first name, a last name. We just sat there like, what should we do? Change it so you will be happy? Eventually, she got over it and moved on with her life, just like I am working on doing as well. Clearly. But this is somewhat common in the US. For some families that want to honor the mother's family because the child takes the father's last name, they will give the child the mother's maiden name as a middle name. Or a slightly more old-fashioned tradition that is still practiced some today is that some female children are not given a middle name when they are born because when they get married, they take the husband's surname and their maiden name becomes their middle name. And by the way, it's not that in the US you really can just name your child anything you want. Although some celebrity names will have you thinking you can, many states do have guidelines of what you can name a child that excludes some things like emojis and special characters, or letters that don't exist in the English alphabet. For example, in Texas, even with all their German heritage,
welcome to the #1 celebration in Fredericksburg, Texas, Oktoberfest.
Umlauts are not allowed in a name. It's going to come down to what state you live in though, because every state does have their own guidelines. You also find some websites that say certain names in the US are illegal, like Adolf Hitler, but then you'll find websites that talk about people who actually have children named this exactly. So yes, there are technically some restrictions in the US, but not nearly like in Germany. To see who made it this far into the video, the random question of the week is, does cilantro taste like soap to you? Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. Be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and I will see you in my next video. I feel like there's food in my mouth. Maybe my teeth. Hold on.